So I put all these things together. I said, okay, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a toolbox that actually helps me think outside of the box, that uses the most creative part of my brain, okay? Because I think that's more fun, actually. I don't know whether more fun, but it's fun to use the creative part. That actually helps me understand how technologies will disrupt supply chains. And we can also use that for improve our communication, okay? And all this in a context where technology is accelerating the rate of innovation. So, questions up to here? That could be one part of the message. No? So, I focus on developing a tool that brings us clarity into communications. Well, this is what happens. So, yesterday in class, I was talking to my international logistics students, and I told them, look guys, you need to understand that if you are starting a path to become supply chain professionals, then every function in the company talks a different language, right? And if you want to convince a salesperson or a finance person, and you talk to that person in supply chain terms, you're going to put that person to sleep in 20 seconds. So the better you are at communicating supply chain stuff is if you're able to talk about supply chain issues without getting dirty with the supply chain details. Maybe there's a time for that. But to make the sale at the beginning, you have to talk in a different set of terms. So the question is, how do we develop a message that is clear, that is complete, that is congruent, so that all aspects of my story fit, okay? Everything I'm telling you tell the same story, support the same story, and that actually increases the chances for communication. So I developed this canvas, okay, which is a tool to be completed. The boxes in the canvas are set, and the boxes come out from that research that I've done on how technologies disrupt supply chains. And I found that with these boxes, if we put ourselves in the process of completing the canvas, then we will put ourselves in the situation of trying to explain an improvement opportunity in a way that is relevant to the business, that includes the main aspects of supply chain, and sets the expectations correctly to evaluate progress. So the canvas has 3 questions: what, how, and why. The what is, what are we trying to do? The how is how we're going to support that idea, that innovation that we are trying to accomplish. And the why is, why are we messing with all this? So I have 2 routes to go here. Let me walk through quickly through the boxes, and then I can show you a couple of examples. So the what has 2 elements: the innovation and the value proposition. The innovation is, what are we trying to do? And probably in some cases, innovation looks like a big word. So I was working with a food company in Argentina, and this guy, his name is Fernando. Fernando told me, well, we are working on implementing CPFR, and CPFR is not an innovation, right? So can we use the canvas to assess how the implementation of CPFR will impact our business? They're in a very particular business situation because they have a dedicated network of distributors, and they were going to implement CPFR with the distributors. Well, my answer was, do you guys know about CPFR? Have you implemented CPFR? No. So it's a learning process, right? To you, it's an innovation. It might not be an innovation to someone else that it's a rock star doing CPFR, but the organization needs to walk through the learning process similar to that of an innovation, okay? The other one is value proposition, that when you talk about value proposition and you listen to entrepreneurs talking about value proposition, they're always thinking about the customer. While in supply chain, we might create value for very different constituents. So what we're trying to do in supply chain, who is the recipient of the value proposition? Is it the end customer? Is it the channel? Is it a key customer? Only one key customer? Is it us? Is it an efficiency improvement for us? Okay? Is it something that we're doing to improve the relationship with our suppliers? So in supply chain, the recipient of value proposition takes a different dimension than in other situations. Then we have the what, which is the middle row. Okay? And to me, the minimum elements that we need to assess is the supply chain structure, which means how the supply chain will be changed. Is the network of suppliers going to be the same? That's if the disruption is big. Is the location of our suppliers the same? Is the location of our customers the same? I have material to give you if you want. I mean, you're welcome to take pictures, but I brought printouts for you guys. The other, so that's one, okay? We're talking about digitization. Well, maybe the physical supply chain doesn't change, but the way the information flows and who makes decisions in terms of information flow does change, okay? I call that part of the structure because we are going to change that every 3 months, okay? It's usually something that stays there and we operate around it every time we change it. Then it's power, and power has two dimensions. Power has, maybe technology disrupts the power relationship in a supply chain. Here in this area, in Northwest Arkansas, it's easy to talk about the relative power of Walmart given the advance or the growth of other retailers. But if you think about I don't know, a technology that imagine that you have a technology, a new technology that develops a product. So I'm missing our Colgate representative. So to fabricate toothpaste, you need a seaweed that is called carrageenan. Okay? While carrageenan is being replaced by a substitute, a technological substitute. Okay? So the relative power of the supplier, in this case would be companies like FMC, for example. The relative power of those companies relative to Colgate will diminish because of the alternative product. So that talks about power. But if the information flow changes, and this is the example we did with Jeff, we found that the power also has an impact in who makes decisions that make the supply chain work. Okay? So information changes the location of who makes the decisions about how activities in the supply chain occur. Scale, well, we talked about scale diminishing. So it seems that technology will foster a diminishing scale required to make an operation efficient. At least in manufacturing. In logistics, we are observing that that's what we're going to do, right? We are moving to a smaller delivery, more frequent delivery of everything. Risk, we don't talk a lot about risk except when we are at risk. Risk has 3 components from my point of view. One is conformance, the other one is continuity of flow, and the other one is complexity. And complexity is the one risk component that we talk the least. Okay, companies tend to put a lot of energy on developing things, okay, and sometimes we overlook the implications for the increased complexity in many aspects, in the operation, in the product, in managing inventory, you name it. So complexity should be a discussion. Why I think we need to talk about risk and why I think we need all those 3 components of risk to be assessed, because technologies, what they do is they change the relative weight of each component of risk. Okay? So there's a trade-off, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And then time. Time, I think it's important because many of the things that we do a lot of the time is a result of the physics of the supply chain, okay? Let's be honest among logisticians. If we could manage a supply chain without inventory, wouldn't you? Yes, right? So we are not having inventory because we kind of like inventory. We have inventory because there is a time gap between the time that activities take and the time the customer needs the product or wants the product. Thus, I close that time gap with inventory, okay? But if you 3D print your cufflinks, then there's no inventory. So my point is that focusing on inventory is a consequence of time. So thus we need to think about time, okay? In other words, we shouldn't talk to people that are not from supply chain about inventory until we are sure they understand the time gaps in our operation, until we're sure they understand the physics of the supply chain, okay? More importantly, because there's something that I call time arbitrage. And time arbitrage is we can do things for the customer, and the customer, in exchange for those value features, is willing to give us time. Consequently, I use the time that the customers give me to replace inventory or to close the gap between the time activities take and the time the customer expects the product. Okay? Examples are the cufflinks, but also examples are Nike ID. Okay, so you can go to Nike's website, so you can go to Academy Sports and buy a pair of running shoes and get running right now, or you can go to Nike ID, get your running shoes custom made to you. Okay, you can even write on the side, "Run Sebastian, run." Okay, but you'll have to wait a week, 10 days. Okay, again, that's time that Nike uses to manufacture the product and replaces all the inventory that is through the channel from the factory to the store. And then financial implications, which cost will be a key component, but I think that we also need to make the connection between the value proposition and revenue generation. Okay, otherwise, revenue will always be accrued by marketing and sales. Okay, however, I mean, there's plenty of research, both in academia and in practice, that customers actually choose a supplier because of the supply chain capabilities. And last one is expectations, and here I have like a funny way of explaining it, but expectations, what I mean by expectations is, let's assume you design an operation to deliver in 100, okay? Demand was higher than expected. You were able to make the supply chain stretch to deliver 120. But someone said that we could have sold 150. We never know, we'll never know whether that's true. But someone said we could have sold 150. Are you rewarded because you were able to sell 20 more than you designed the operation for? Or are you punished because you missed the 30 that you didn't sell? Okay? So again, there is a component of setting expectations, and that's the last box. So, questions, or I show you a couple of examples, and I'll ask some people to participate here. Yeah.